Controlling rebirth at death, the Buddha's 2 rules for facing the end. The Buddha says, when you see the sunset, remind yourself that this could be your last sunset. You could go tonight. Are you ready to go? Look at what needs to be done, both in terms of preparing yourself and in terms of leaving a good gift behind for the people you'll have to leave. Remember those 4 qualities: conviction, virtue, generosity, discernment. All phenomena are rooted in desire. It's one of the basic principles in the Buddha's teachings, and it applies to your meditation right now. Make sure you desire the right things. Different desires will come up, some of them wanting to stay with the breath, some of them wanting to wander off. So hold on to the desires that want to stay, because who knows where you'll wander off to otherwise. But if you stay with the breath, you can get the mind into a state of concentration. The concentration can give rise to discernment. Discernment will help you see through all the processes by which desire creates things, and you get to the point where you can go beyond. Whereas, if you wander off, you'll end up just coming back to the same old desires that you've been mucking around in for who knows how long. Staying on the path gives you the prospect of something new. And you do practice with desire. We often hear that craving is the cause of suffering. That's true. But the Buddha points out 3 cravings in particular: craving for sensuality, for becoming, and for non-becoming. That's in the 2nd noble truth. Yet in the 4th noble truth, he points out that the desire to develop what's skillful and abandon what's unskillful is part of the path to the end of suffering. So not all desire is bad. You want to get to know your desires really well and be able to sort them out. This is a useful skill to develop not only while you're here meditating, but also as you go through life and as you approach death, because the process of desiring is what will take you on to another life. You want to make sure you choose your desires well. Choices, now and at death. There was a wanderer who came to see the Buddha one time and asked him, "What is it that sustains a being from one life to the next?" And the Buddha said it's sustained by clinging to craving in the same way that wind sustains fire as it goes from one house to the next. The thing is, that's not the only time when you're sustained by your desires, sustained by your craving. As you go through your life, day by day by day, this is what defines you as a being. Notice that when the wanderer asked that question of the Buddha gave him a straight answer. Beings are sustained by craving. If the wanderer had asked some modern Buddhists, they might have said, well, there really is no being there anyhow. There's no continued identity, so there's nothing to go from one life to the next, which leaves people really adrift when they die and they find that they're not ending. We sometimes think that the Buddha simply picked up his teachings on rebirth from his culture. But the way he taught rebirth was very different from what other people taught at the time. For one thing, not everybody in his culture believed in rebirth. Some said there was no rebirth, others said there was, and the way they would try to settle the issue would be by trying to define what you are. What is this thing, this being, and can this thing be reborn or not? Now, the Buddha took it as one of the basic principles of mundane right view that there is the next world. In other words, there is life after death. But he didn't get involved in the common terms of the discussion. He didn't say what it is that goes on. He said simply, this is how it happens. And how it happens is the same process that defines you as a being, your craving, your attachments. The only people who are not beings are arahants, because they have no attachments. That's why they don't get reborn. We create our identity as beings, then we sustain it with our craving. And then, when we find we can't stay here in this body, we grab at whatever. If you're not prepared, you will grab at whatever. The mind is capable of all kinds of things. As the Buddha said, it's more variegated than the animal kingdom. All the different animals that you can think of in the earth, on land, at sea, and in the sky come from the craving of the mind. Look at the animal world, and what you see is a small fraction of the many shapes and forms that the mind can take. When you're counseling someone who's facing death, that's what you want to keep in mind, that the mind is capable of grabbing on, holding on to anything. So make sure that the person holds on to good things. The Buddha's first advice is to ask if they're worried about anything. Usually it's with the family or with unfinished business. The Buddha's advice is to tell the person, just put that aside. You're dying now. There's nothing you can do for the family. There's nothing you can do about your unfinished business. The nature of the world is that all its business is unfinished. Tell the person who's passing away not to expect closure and focus instead on the state of his or her mind. The next question is, are you afraid of leaving your body? Are you afraid of leaving human sensuality? If the person says yes, the Buddha's first answer is really interesting. He says that there are levels of being where the sensuality is better. Aim your mind there. Now, this will depend on what that person's belief systems are. When people are dying, you don't want to impose something new on them as long as they do believe that the mind will survive death. What's important is that where the mind is holding on will create a state of mind that will either be lifted up or pulled down. So have the person think of things that will lift him or her up. In other words, the goodness they've done, not the good times they've had. If you get them thinking about the good times they've had, they might get depressed over the fact that those good times are over. Have them think instead of the times they've been generous, they've been virtuous, when they've shown their goodwill to others. Have them focus their mind there. In other words, give the mind something good to hold on to. Then the Buddha goes on to say that if the person is capable, you might say, even the best thing you can hold on to would be a self-identity. And self-identities are going to change and end. It would be better if you could let go of the need for self-identity. In other words, stop defining yourself as a being. Let go, totally. But for a lot of people, that's not in the cards. So instead, you have them focus on the good they've done. That way, when different possibilities open up to them as they find that they can't stay in the body, they'll have the confidence that they have some good to them. There's no reason why they have to go down. The Ajahns in Thailand talk about two kinds of visions that appear to a person passing away. The first kind consists of visions of their past actions. The other is visions of where they can go. If you've been focusing on some past bad actions, then if a vision of a bad place to go comes up, you're likely to fall for it, because that's one of the things we fear as we approach death, that maybe there will be some punishment lying in wait for the bad things we've done in life. This is one of the reasons why people who've done bad things often like to comfort themselves with the idea that, well, maybe if everything was predetermined, they didn't have any choice. They're not responsible, and therefore, they won't get punished. But that's not how things work. The important thing to keep in mind is that there are only a very few things that would absolutely ensure that you would have to go down. Killing your parents, killing an arahant. As long as you haven't done any of those things, then you've got the possibility of going up. As the Buddha said, that's part of the complexity of Kamma. There are some times when you do something bad in this lifetime but you don't suffer in the next, and vice versa. You do good things in this lifetime and yet you suffer in the next, because the Kamma you're dealing with is not just the Kamma in this lifetime, but also your Kamma from the past. Where you go also has to do with whether you change your mind up or down in the course of your life. This is why so much emphasis is placed on the state of the mind as you're dying. That's asking for an awful lot, because as you're dying, you're dealing with the fact that the body is not cooperating anymore. It's no longer doing the things it used to do for you. This is another reason why we meditate, to develop the strength of mind that doesn't have to depend on the strength of the functioning of the body. So work on your mind here, because it does influence how you're living, who you are in this lifetime, and how you go as you go to the next. and it is possible to change the mind. Past Kamma is not ironclad. It creates tendencies. But we can develop skills in the present moment to handle even bad tendencies and not suffer from them. This principle of having choice in the present moment is really central to the practice. You do have the choice to develop the mind or to do something else. The Buddha took this so seriously that even though he wasn't the sort of person who went around picking fights, he would go and search out teachers whom he had heard were teaching that you don't have choices, or if you do have choices, it doesn't matter because your actions don't have any results. Those kinds of teachings, the Buddha said, are really detrimental. The people who teach them do a lot of harm, which is why he felt it was important to seek those people out and see if he could change their minds, or at least let other people know that that kind of teaching was dangerous. As he said, it leaves you unprotected and bewildered. You don't want to be unprotected and bewildered as you're going through life, and especially as you're facing death. Have confidence that you can change the mind. You have that choice. And the mind does have possibilities, many of which are more than you can imagine. So, train the mind in the direction where it will go for the best possibilities. Keep in mind the principle of choice and have the confidence that, yes, you can learn how to make better and better choices. If that weren't possible, the Buddha wouldn't have taught. The fact that he did teach after gaining awakening is a sign that he wanted us to take this as a working hypothesis, that we do have choices. Because it's not until you gain your first taste of awakening that you really know for sure that, yes, you have choices and that they can become so skillful that they can lead you to the end of suffering. Only at stream entry will you know for sure. Up to that point, it's a matter of faith. Or if you don't like the word faith, use the word conviction. It's a working hypothesis. Act on it and, the Buddha says, you'll benefit. Everybody who's reached awakening also says you'll benefit. They're the kind of people you want to believe. In your right mind at death. There's a fire not too far away which reminds you that it could come in our direction someday. The question is, are you ready? We have this tendency to block out the fact that because bad things can happen in the world to other people, it means that bad things can happen to us. We block that out. That's complacency, heedlessness, which the Buddha said is the basis for all unskillful qualities. So we have to cultivate heedfulness instead, reminding ourselves that there are dangers. The big danger in life, of course, is that we're going to die, and that's unavoidable. It's going to happen someday. You can avoid it in specific instances, but it's going to get you someday. And the question is, are you ready to go? I was reading a series of biographies one time in French to get the language back. I noticed that, especially with people in politics, as they got older, the challenges against them got stronger and stronger. You'd think that people would let up, seeing that these people were old and weak, but that's when the challenges got really savage. The same thing happens at death. You're weak, the body is malfunctioning, and then on top of that you're going to die. There's the challenge. You can't just give up and go. You're going to be making choices. Those choices will determine your future course, and they'll be determined by your state of mind. You want to make sure that your state of mind is as good as possible. This is why we meditate, so that no matter how bad things get in the body, no matter how bad things get in the world, we can still be strong in mind. We can maintain our mindfulness. We can still keep our wits about us. A lot of people, when they die, end up choosing places to go that no one in their right mind would want to go. But then again, when you die, you're very rarely in your right mind. To put yourself in your right mind, you have to prepare. The Buddha says there are 4 reasons that fear comes up at death. Fear of losing your body, fear of losing human sensual pleasures, fear that the bad things you've done in life will lead to punishment in the next life, and the fear that comes from not knowing the true Dhamma. The people who have this last fear wouldn't necessarily express it in those terms. What it means is they have no idea for sure what's going to happen at death. They have no proof that there is such a thing as the deathless. So there's a big, gaping hole in their awareness, a big blank, and it's scary. So we try to prepare for these kinds of fear through our meditation. Like fear of losing the body. It's one of the reasons why we do body contemplation. You go through the body, part by part by part, and you ask yourself, which part is really worth holding on to? Which one is really worth coming back to? Taken apart like that, there's nothing with any appeal. We do this so that we're not attracted to the idea of coming back to any body. What usually happens is that you realize you can't stay in this body at the point of death, and the opportunity comes to go to another one. Many people just jump. In some cases, it's simply the opportunity to have any body at all, and you go for that. In other cases, you might have a vision of a very attractive body, either one that you would be able to take on yourself, or the body of someone you might get as a partner in that particular world. But just because your body looks good by whatever standards you measure good-looking bodies, doesn't mean that it's going to be healthy, doesn't mean that life is going to be a good life. And just because someone else is attractive doesn't mean that they're going to be good people to live with. There are a lot of really beautiful people who live miserable lives. Their beauty becomes a curse, so you have to think about that. Again, this is why we contemplate the body. Get used to taking off the skin in your mind and taking the different organs out and placing them on the ground so that when the time comes to die, that will be a very quick reaction to any beautiful body that appears to your mind. If a heavenly body comes, you can ask yourself, what? A diva body may not have the parts of a human body, but divas tend to get complacent. Can you imagine what life would be like in one of the heavens, where as soon as you think of wanting something, it appears? You can imagine how you could become spoiled, and when you fall from there, you fall hard. But if in your meditation you can develop any of the formless states, staying with a sense of infinite space, a sense of infinite consciousness, nothingness, you don't feel so threatened when you're being pushed out of this body. You know that the mind has good places to go that don't require having a body. It can be okay about the fact that the body is deteriorating. Ajahn Fuang had a student who, one night as she was meditating, had a voice appear in her meditation saying, "You're going to die tonight." She told herself, well, if I'm going to die, I might as well die meditating. So she continued to meditate. She said it was as if her body had turned into a house on fire. No matter which room you went into, you couldn't stay because it was all on fire. Then she remembered space. So she focused on the space element and she didn't feel threatened by the fire in the house at all. Then when she later came back to the body, everything had settled back down to normal. And she learned an important lesson. If you can access space in your meditation, you don't feel so threatened when the body pushes you out, and you're less likely to make quick and unwise judgments. You're more willing to take a little bit of time and be a little bit more picky about where you go. That can help overcome at least some of your fear of losing the body. As for the fear of losing sensual pleasures, the Buddha has you reflect that there are better sensual pleasures than just the human, and it is possible to meditate as a diva. There's a great story in the canon where a person who dies gets reborn as a diva. He meets up with another diva. It turns out that they were friends in their human lives and they used to chant together. The other diva says, "Let's chant some more." And so they do. That leads to more Dhamma practice, which protects you from the usual problem in the heavenly realms, getting complacent. We have the same problem in the human realm. You get comfortable, you have a nice hut, a nice house, you feel secure, and you tend to get lazy. When you become a diva and you have a diva palace, there's an even greater tendency to get lazy. So you want to be clear on the fact that wherever you go, you want to practice. You want the opportunity to practice, and you want to take advantage of it. Which is why it's good to foster the kinds of delight we talked about the other day, Delight in the Dhamma. Delight in abandoning. Delight in developing. You want that to become second nature. If you can develop the pleasure and rapture that come from concentration, you provide yourself with an alternative to sensuality. You don't feel so pulled to go for sensual pleasures of any kind. Otherwise, you get easily trapped. Ajahn Mun talks about remembering that he'd been reborn as a dog for 500 lifetimes in a row. It's hard to imagine him as a dog, but he said it happened. And if it's happened to him, it's probably happened to you. As he said, why was that? It was because he got satisfied with the sensual pleasures of dogs, so be careful about sensuality. This fascination we have with thinking about sex and food and all the other pleasures of the senses can appear as you die, and it can pull you down. So remember, there is this alternative. Develop this alternative and develop a taste for it. The alternative offered by the pleasure and rapture of concentration, the pleasure of form, or the pleasure of the formless. That way you won't feel so desperate and threatened when you die. As for fear of being punished, sometimes, as you get close to death, you start thinking about the things you did. Times when, as the Buddha would put it, you were cruel. Times when you didn't give protection to people who were in danger. It may happen that a bad world appears to you. The worst thing that can happen at that time is that you'd say, gee, I did all this good in my life, and I'm going down to a bad place. The Buddha must have been wrong. Right view was probably wrong. That would really pull you down. But if you remind yourself that you haven't done any of the things that would automatically require that you go down to a lower realm, you do have some goodness to you, and you maintain right view that can close off the paths to those lower realms. So remember how important right view is. Even if you've done bad things in this life, they don't necessarily pull you down. It's the attitude that rejects right view that pulls you down. So have strong conviction that your actions, your good actions, really do have power, and that you can depend on the memory of those actions. Finally, knowing the true Dhamma. That requires that you've had at least a glimpse of the deathless, so that you know there is something in the mind that's outside of space and time. Death goes only as far as space and time. There's something in the mind that death can't touch. When you've seen that, as the Buddha says, there's no fear about where you're going to go after death. There may be fear of the pain that comes with death, or of the fact that your life will be interrupted. But then that's the nature of life. It always gets interrupted. Think about people living in a war zone right now. Whatever plans they had for their lives and their families just got chopped off, and that's the nature of life in general. The end of life is not a nice closure, where everybody gathers around and talks about how much they love you and all the projects you had planned come to completion. The nature of life is that things get chopped off, they get interrupted, so you've got to be prepared. You may say, well, maybe not this time around. Maybe next time I'll be able to complete what I wanted to do. But the only real completion that comes in this world is when you gain awakening. Everything else is just a world of loose ends, interrupted lives. So do your best while you have this opportunity to practice, while things are comfortable. Don't be heedless. You can prepare for death so that you're not afraid of it. When you're not afraid of it, then you will be in your right mind as you die, and you'll be in a much better position to make wise choices. Mindfulness of death. Of the 4 guardian meditations, 2 are special. Contemplation of the foulness of the body and mindfulness of death, the Buddha said, can both lead to the deathless. He doesn't say that about recollection of the Buddha, doesn't say that about the development of goodwill, but if you follow the contemplation of the body and mindfulness of death in the proper way, they can take you beyond the body and beyond death. How mindfulness of death does this can be seen in those 5 recollections that we chant so often? The last 3 are especially relevant here. First, you simply remind yourself of the fact of death. It could come at any time. You haven't gone beyond it. You can see other people dying, and it's so easy to forget. They die. Well, we're going to die too. We're remarkably blind in that way. We're like the penguins in the story Charcot told of his sailors down in Antarctica. They were staying next to a penguin colony, and the sailors found that they could kill a penguin right in the middle of the colony, take it back, and make penguin pate, as long as they were quiet about it. The other penguins didn't notice. The men could walk through the colony, and the penguins felt no fear even though their numbers were going down one by one by one. That's the way it is with a lot of us. So the Buddha has you reflect. You haven't gone beyond death. It can come at any time. There's a famous passage where he's talking to some monks and saying, "Cultivate mindfulness of death." Different monks say, "Well, I already do that." The Buddha asks them how often they do it. One monk says he does it once a day. Another monk says twice a day. The monks get down to shorter and shorter intervals until finally one monk says, "In the amount of time that it takes to chew a morsel of food, I tell myself I could die, but I can do a lot in the meantime." Another monk says, "In the amount of time it takes to breathe in and breathe out, I tell myself I have enough time in this one breath to do a lot of good in the practice." The Buddha says, of the various monks, only those last two are really heedful. The rest are heedless. In other words, you have to be right on top of the present moment, realizing that you have no time to waste. There's work to be done here. What kind of work to be done is something that comes not only with reflecting on the fact of death, but also the Buddha's analysis of what happens at death. That falls in with the next two reflections. You're going to be separated from all that is dear and appealing to you. Often our first reaction to the thought of death is, if I die, I'll be missing this person, that person. If the reflection were to stop there, you'd be left without any real guidance. You'd simply start getting sentimental, very attached, very clingy. But then the Buddha goes on to have you reflect about Kamma, that you're the owner of your actions. The other person is the owner of his or her actions. How you die and where you're going to go after you die is going to depend a great deal on your actions, both present and past. It's not going to depend on any other person at all. This is where the Buddha gives specific guidance, saying that at the moment of death, the mind will latch on to craving and be swept from one body to another, in the same way that a fire can latch on to the wind and be swept from one burning house to a house next door, setting that second house on fire. The problem with wind is that it's blind. Craving tends to be blind too, so you want to make sure that your Kamma is not blind. At the moment of death, you're going to be offered choices. Which houses happen to be next door will depend on what you've been doing throughout your life. If you've been doing good things, there will be good houses. Things not so good, there'll be houses you might not want to go to, but that's where the wind will blow you. So, as the Buddha said, there are 4 qualities you want to develop to help ensure that you'll at least have a good house to be blown to. There's conviction in the Buddha's awakening. Virtue, making sure that you follow the precepts. Generosity, you're generous with your wealth, with your time. As the Buddha said in another reference to a burning house, when a house is about to burn down, you don't leave valuables in the house. You get them out of the house, and the ones you get out are the ones that you'll be able to save. In the same way, the things you've given away are saved. The things you hold on to are the ones that you'll have to leave behind in the burning house. Finally, there's discernment, seeing what's skillful in the mind, what's unskillful in the mind, and knowing how to talk yourself into doing what's skillful and out of doing what's unskillful, regardless of your likes or dislikes. When you reflect on the fact of your own death, remind yourself, these are the qualities I've got to develop in myself. When you reflect on the fact that the people you love are going to die, your best gift to them before you part would be to encourage them to develop these qualities as well. In this way, you're a true good friend to them because after all, these 4 qualities are the attributes of a Kalyana Mitta, an admirable friend. We tend to think of a Kalyana Mitta as being a friend in the Dhamma, but being a Kalyana Mitta can also mean simply that you're a friend to other members of your family, those who are close to you. If you really love them, you remind yourself that they're agents too. They're subject to their karma. Then you want to do your best to make sure, to whatever extent you can influence them, that they're established in these qualities as well. There are also other qualities that the Buddha recommends developing in preparation for death. There's a list of the qualities of devas. It's basically those 4 qualities: conviction, virtue, generosity, discernment, plus learning. This, of course, refers to the Dhamma you've learned, and most particularly, I think, the Dhamma you've memorized. This is why it's good to memorize passages in Pali and English, so that you have some skillful thoughts sloshing around in the mind. After all, as death comes, the mind can latch on to all kinds of things, and if you've been impregnating your mind with good Dhamma, then that can have an influence on you at times like that. That's some of the past Kamma you'll be bringing with you. As for the beings that go to the level of the Brahmas, they develop the Brahmaviharas. This is another good way of preparing for death. At the same time, you want to develop the qualities that you'll need right at the moment of the death, the present Kamma that you'll be engaged in at that time. There's a sutta where the Buddha comes to a sick ward and tells the monks to approach death mindful and alert. These are the 2 main qualities you're going to need at that time, and of course they're the qualities you develop as you meditate. The Buddha then gives the standard definition for establishing mindfulness, keeping focused on the body in and of itself, ardent, alert, and mindful, putting aside greed and distress with reference to the world. The same with feelings in and of themselves, mind states in and of themselves, dhammas in and of themselves. As for alertness, you're alert to the postures of the body, the movements of the body as they're happening, so you're focused on what you're doing, and you want to make sure that craving doesn't sweep in and distract you at that point. This is where the other guardian meditations are helpful. When you're feeling abandoned, alone, facing the fact that you could be dying, you recollect the Buddha and all the noble ones who've been practicing. You're following in their footsteps. They were able to approach the moment of death as victors, and in many cases, alone. One of the purposes of the recollection of the Buddha and Sangha is that if they can do it, you can too. When memories come up of people who have wronged you, or people whom you've wronged, develop thoughts of goodwill. When you start getting attached to the body, it's good to recollect that the body is made out of what? It's made out of those 32 parts, plus other parts, none of which is endowed with any special inherent goodness. The goodness of the body is what you did with it. Now that it's a tool no longer functioning, it's time to put the tool aside. It's not good for anything anymore, except as an object of contemplation. If you can maintain your focus, then the Buddha has you focus particularly on the issue of feelings in the body, because those are the things that'll stand out most at that point. If there's a feeling of pain, he has you reflect on the fact that this feeling of pain is dependent on what? It's dependent on the body. Is the body constant? No, it's inconstant. If the condition is inconstant, how can the pain be constant? There's another passage that says, pain is like the shadow of a stump. The stump is inconstant. It's not going to last forever, so how can its shadow last forever? So look at pains as shadows. And as the Buddha said, when you reflect on this, from inconstant you go to stressful, from stressful you go to not self. That's how you engage in the last 4 steps of breath meditation at that point. Focused on inconstancy, focused on dispassion, cessation, and then letting go. So whatever pains come up, approach them this way, not with the thought that this is my pain or I am in pain, but simply seeing that the body is one thing, the pain is something else. The body as a cause is inconstant, so the pain's got to be inconstant too. Look for its inconstancy. That helps to pull you out. Then the Buddha has you go on and do the same thing with feelings of pleasure and feelings of equanimity. In other words, if you're able to get the mind into deep concentration at that point, you realize that these states too are dependent on the body. The pleasure of jhana, the equanimity of jhana. They too are things you have to let go. If you can do this, the Buddha says, then you can be free of any aversion obsession with regard to pain, any passion obsession with regard to pleasure, and any ignorance obsession with regard to equanimity. You sense these things disjoined from them, realizing that as the body ends, they're going to end too, and what remains is the deathless. That's how mindfulness of death prepares you to find the deathless. It depends on remembering that we're not simply aware of the fact that death is going to happen, but we also have a particular take on how it's going to happen. The Buddha's instructions on how to anticipate what's going to happen. The mind will be swept along by its cravings depending on its kamma, the kamma you do as you go through the day and the kamma you're doing as you approach the moment of death. Your daily habits, your meditative skills, these are the things that will determine whether you suffer or not. This way, you're prepared emotionally, but you're also prepared in terms of the skills you'll have to bring to bear. When you approach mindfulness of death from this perspective, then you're going to get the most out of it. So, as the Buddha says, when you see the sunset, remind yourself that this could be your last sunset. You could go tonight. Are you ready to go? Look at what needs to be done, both in terms of preparing yourself and in terms of leaving a good gift behind for the people you'll have to leave. Remember those 4 qualities: conviction, virtue, generosity, discernment. To whatever extent you can develop them, to whatever extent you can help others develop them, that's your gift. But your true gift to yourself, though, comes in the form of the skills you develop as you meditate, learning how not to get distracted, how to stay mindful, alert, and in particular, alert not only to the postures of the body, but also to what you're doing in the mind, how you're relating to your feelings and to your sense of the body. The work that needs to be done is not far away. It's all right here, which is good because there will come a time when death will be right here and you'll have your skills right here too. You'll be prepared.